This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 377 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Happy New Year! This is the first episode for 2026 and we are talking about overlooked perspectives on travel. Firstly, let me pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation where I'm recording this podcast today. Now, this episode has come out of having basically a collection of stories that I really wanted to share. And for a while, I didn't know quite where they fitted until I realised that what they all have in common is they're looking at travel-related topics from perspectives that we don't often hear about, though in many cases we should. I was quite excited when I realised this link and thought these are some great stories that help us consider thinking about things from a different angle, which I think is often the point of travel, but sometimes we need to, certainly for me, I need to think a bit harder. So I'm hoping these stories are both interesting and thought-provoking. My first guest is Kiliii Yuyan, and I chatted with Kiliii a while back for our special anniversary episode in 2025. Kiliii was, in fact, one of my very, very, very first guests nearly a decade ago, and I caught up with him again. In that interim decade, Kiliii has become a bit of a big deal in the photography space, and when we chatted last year, he was working, or had been working, on a big National Geographic special on Indigenous stewardship of place, and he mentioned some time he'd spent in Palau for this project. And not knowing much about Palau, except basically all I knew was when I lived in Japan, some of my scuba diving loving students would go to Palau. That's kind of all I knew about it. So I said, Kiliii, tell me more and tell me about what you learned there.
Palau is near the Philippines, and it is a beautiful tropical island country. And it is an indigenous majority country, meaning that the place's original inhabitants, not only are they still there in the majority of the people, but the country is founded on indigenous principles. And so there's a lot of ideas about the way that it governs itself, and its laws are created that are indigenous. That also includes Mongolia and Greenland. And so it's not a coincidence that Mongolia and Greenland are also on the list of places that are really beautiful and have people there because, there are places where the cultural structure of caring for land is built into the laws of the land once it's been formalized at the nation level, which is really cool. But so Palau, people go there on vacation from all over the world to go diving. The water is 30 degrees, basically 30 Celsius.
Perfect.
Yeah, really, really perfect. Very, very nice. You just slip off the boat in it with a tank on
and you're happy.
And you're good to go, or with a snorkel, And it has some of the most biodiverse coral reefs on Earth. And the coral survives the bleaching events because of a very unique thing. The coral is so healthy because Palau has some of the healthiest fisheries on Earth. And for the tropical regions, that's no joke, and we're talking about some of the tuna and all the varieties of tuna and lots of other fish, but especially reef fish, right? Which are easy to catch and in high demand among the islands. And it's also close enough to China that Chinese fishing vessels would love to come in and fish.
Yes.
But the nation of Palau is 80% of Palau is an economic exclusion zone, and it's a marine protected area. Palau Marine Protected Area, which is one of the world's largest. And it may very well be the world's largest marine protected area in truth, as opposed to being on paper.
Right.
That's actually enforced and stuff. Yeah. The reason why those coral survive the bleaching events and where they recover quickly is because the fishery is so healthy that, when coral bleaches, what happens is basically the algae that's inside the coral gets a little too feisty. It gets so much sunshine and so much warmth that they start producing way too much sugar, and the coral's like, this is way too much.
Okay.
And they spit out the algae.
Right.
Just to keep themselves from getting toxic shock. It's be like drinking, 30 cans of Coke in a day.
Yeah.
Right. You just got to stop. So you just throw it all out, Yeah. But then eventually without that algae, the coral doesn't stand a very good chance in the long run of surviving because that algae does give them sugars that they need over the long run. So they start to try to collect it back, but it takes some time. And the biggest impediment to bringing the algae back into themselves is that another kind of opportunistic algae grows on the outside of the coral and covers it. It's a good, greenish algae will cover the outside and block everything, block all the light, etc. And so what happens though is that there are fish, and especially parrotfish, that swim around and they eat that algae that's on the outsides of the coral. And they eat it right up and they eat it really fast. And so by cleaning that negative algae off, then the coral is able to get the algae that it really likes, the zooxanthellae that it really needs, back into its tissues quickly. Yeah, and it's able to survive. The longer it is without that stuff, the less likely it is to survive, right? And so the longer it goes, the harder it is to recover, and it goes really quick, so they recover quickly. Mm-hmm. And so you've had these reefs that will bounce back in just a year or two, as opposed to some places like you're looking at 10 years.
Yeah.
And often
or maybe
beyond
forever.
that, just don't make it. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. And so part of the reason is that their fisheries, it's a healthy ocean because of the way that it's cared for there in Palau.
That's exactly
and
it.
So
the
right fish are there at the right time and it all works out. Everyone's happy.
Yeah, that's precisely it. I mean, but it's the trick of it is so hard is because those reef fish that eat all that algae, they're the easy to catch extremely tasty species that roam around. Yeah. And they're the ones that everyone wants to catch, and they're right in the lagoons, right in your local backyard if you live on islands, next to coral. And so developing the sustainable fishery is really tough. And the Palauans have like centuries old systems for managing a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's the real magic of it, is that they have, they've been on islands, they've survived famines before, and so they remember what it was like to overharvest the fish and starve. And so they pass those stories down in the form of stories that are carved. There's a few stories that are so well known to them that they're carved wooden boards, those beautiful pieces of art. And everyone's got one in their house, or like painted, or on the outside of a museum, inside the restaurants. It's like the same stories everywhere, all over the place. Actually, I'll tell you the story. There's a really great story. So a long time ago, on the island village of Niptal, there was an elderly woman. This woman who she was pretty old and she wasn't that able-bodied anymore. And she wasn't able to get very much to eat, because she wasn't, she's just not that capable anymore. And the people of her village weren't taking care of her. They wouldn't give her any food. And so she basically lived off the fruit of this tree outside of her house called a breadfruit tree. So she would eat the fruit off of this breadfruit tree. One day, her grandson comes home from war, and it's unclear as to whether he was a normal human being or possibly a demigod.
Okay.
But he comes home and he says, "Grandmother, I can't believe that you're in such a sorry strait. This is terrible." So he says, "Come with me." And he walks over to the breadfruit tree and he lops off a big branch of the breadfruit tree. And he says, "Hold your basket underneath the branch." And so she holds it up, and the sea comes pouring out of this hole in the tree, and out comes pouring tons of fish. And so she holds the basket under it, soon fills up with fish. So she's got everything that she needs, and she goes back home. She's very happy, and she has everything that she needs to eat. But lo and behold, very shortly thereafter, the young men of the village catch wind of this. They see it, and they start getting jealous. They're like, "Hey, how come she gets all this fish and she doesn't have to go out sailing for days and work so hard in order to catch the fish?" And so they plot. Then one day, in the middle of the night, they all show up. They pop in while the woman is asleep, and they decide they're going to cut down the breadfruit tree at the very base, and they're going to get all the fish. So they cut off the tree at its base, and sure enough, all the fish start pouring out and pouring out and pouring out. And then the water level rises until the entire village is submerged and everybody dies.
Somber. There's a lesson in that.
Yeah, it's a pretty typical indigenous story. It's a real kind of morbid sense of humor, but I love it. That's partly how you know that it's real. But also, I've been to the village of Natal, and when you look out over the water, you can see hints of the village underneath. There is an actual village site. The village is still there. It's based on real events and real time. Right, so that village is still under there.
Oh, that's an even more impactful story then, isn't it?
Yeah. That's right. I'm told that if you take a boat out, like if you take a rowboat out, it's not very far, and you could just row out there. You can see the base of the breadfruit tree still, also, which is pretty cool. I mean, there's like all the various like kind of easy lessons here. If you think about it a little bit, the easy lesson is don't be a jerk, right? Like
Don't be greedy.
treat your elders well. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Don't be greedy. Treat your elders well. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the easy, low-hanging fruit of the lessons. But what outsiders don't know, that is the actual, a lot of the real lessons embedded in that. What the story is actually telling you is that when the breadfruit on the breadfruit tree is in season, during that short window of time when the breadfruit is in season, you don't harvest fish. You let the fish in the reef rest. And so the fish can repopulate. And so you just eat breadfruit during that time and the fish will repopulate. And then once the breadfruit runs out, you go back to fishing again. Right. And that is part of that cycle of renewal. Right. But they all understand that story. They know what that means. Mm-hmm. Right. They very much remember what the point of that is. And we take away like the sort of these other moral characteristics that we think about. But for Palauans, they know. They remember. And that's a story of deep stewardship and conservation, right? And that's a type of traditional ecological knowledge, like that form of storytelling, the fact that it's carved into their boards and that it pertains to their specific environment and to specific places. That's part of that traditional knowledge that informs them. That's why they have such healthy reefs today. Yeah. I mean, it's just one of a tiny portion of the huge number of reasons, but it's a really good, fun story to tell.
Kiliii and I went on to chat about my experience with the Indigenous seasons here in Western Australia, which I do sometimes mention in my intros, and why they interest me because they particularly match the actual circumstances here in Western Australia much more accurately than the calendar-driven 4 seasons. And I think that's another piece of knowledge we can tap into. So all really interesting stuff. I'd love to dive deeper into all these areas. And I really enjoyed this story from Palau. Something we can all learn a lot from, I think, very worthwhile perspectives to consider. My next guest is Jamie Burr. Jamie has now worked in a variety of roles in the tourism industry, but a part of our chat was about his thesis when he studied a master's in tourism management, and it led to, a really interesting and, to me, unconsidered perspective.
I decided, okay, the acting degree is quite irrelevant for most jobs, so let's get another degree under the chin. And the backpacking thing, just thought, what do I love? I love travel. Okay, easy. Master's in tourism management. So I did that with the intention, like I said, about wanting to learn more about backpacking and the hosteling culture. But
where did you study this master's?
This was in Bournemouth, in my hometown. Yeah, it's just one of the best universities in the world for tourism. At least the academic league tables say so. Like I said, very quickly I discovered all of these issues within tourism that require some urgent attention in terms of managing things better, communicating things better. You hear these horrific stories about problems in the cruise industry or with airlines or exploitation, leakage, all of these things where it feels like tourism is a very exploitative industry a lot of the time. So with that, I mean, I've always been very interested in environmentalism and climate change and things like that. So I think it quite naturally evolved as I learned more of these issues into, I want to pursue sustainable tourism and getting into that as a real meaningful career. So my thesis, I wrote that on the attitudes of carbon offsets of Chinese air travelers, which is very quite niche and specific because
so interesting though.
China is this booming market that's sort of on the verge of explosion. In the next 5-10 years, I think we're going to see a huge surge of tourists coming from China and India because, the middle class is growing so quickly there. Yeah.
The population's so large. So what was the result of your thesis? What were these attitudes?
I found that there's a lot of background research into just general attitudes towards sustainable tourism and carbon offsets. There are lots of things like I mentioned before that lots of people do, even when they are more environmentally responsible at home. They do feel that they largely deserve a holiday, so they don't care as much when they go on holiday. Carbon offsets, not many people have heard of them. They think that it's a good idea, but there's also problems with carbon offsets, in terms of the the permanence measurement and different things like that, how effective they are and how long they actually take to reduce or mitigate the carbon that's been released.
Chinese travellers, had they heard less about this?
I was actually quite surprised. The environmental attitudes of Chinese people seem to be stronger, greater than, North American, European counterparts.
Interesting.
They are a very group-oriented, group-thinking culture, not like us Europeans or Australians or...
They're more individualistic.
Exactly. I was quite surprised by the attitudes of Chinese people towards it because, you think of China as this huge carbon-emitting country, with all these coal mines and power plants and things like that. But the people there, they really do seem to largely care more than the average person in the world. And there is this desire to do things better.
I was actually just in China for the first time in November, literally just for 24 hours because I was staying in Hong Kong for a while. I think every vehicle was electric and there was massive green spaces and lots of things. And I think maybe that groupthink means they're more likely to get on board with initiatives that, are promoted as being a good thing, perhaps because they'll just accept what is thought of as for the greater good.
Yeah. If I remember rightly from my research, I think air pollution was one of their top concerns. So maybe that sort of feeds into this greater consciousness around environmentalism because
yeah, it makes sense.
There's also this sort of temporal and spatial effect that if climate change seems like a distant thing to you, like you hear stories in Bangladesh and things like that almost every week, these wildfires or wherever, but people in the UK, it's so far away it doesn't really affect me. But for people in China living in cities like Beijing, Hong Kong, air pollution is real and it's happening now. So
there's more concrete evidence in front of you. Okay, this is why we need to change things.
Unless you're facing it, unless you're experiencing it, then it's not going to be that high on your list of priorities.
I feel like there's so many interesting parts of this perspective to unpack. It's reminded me also of the chat I had in episode 374 with Renee about my cultural intelligence test and the whole individualism versus collectivism in culture and all sorts of stuff. I briefly mentioned my 24 hours in Shenzhen in China, which was so surprising to me. I think that's a really interesting city. It's grown from a town of like 300,000 less than 50 years ago to a mega city. It's nearly 20 million people in under 50 years. That's, it's crazy. And a lot of that growth is recent enough, I think, to have had, to take environmental impact into account more. That's certainly what I noticed when I was there. It's a really, what I could see, a lot of electric vehicles, a lot of consideration in some ways of the environmental impact. So yeah, this whole perspective of what do the people in China actually consider, what do they think about the environment? We see it as, China is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, but quick bit of research, I could see it's also set really ambitious targets for wind and solar energy and is apparently meeting these ahead of schedule. Who knows? There's just, I think, as always with these perspectives, so many more layers to it and a lot to unpack and something we often overlook. Now, my final guest for today is Monisha Rajesh. Now, you might remember our wonderful chat for episode 365. We chatted longer than that. And so in that interview episode, I focused on when we discussed the whole train journeys, kind of travel by train stuff. And I saved this extract, knowing I could use it somewhere, and I've got it ready now for this episode. So Monisha had been telling me about a Tibetan nun she had met on a train who was actually teaching Monisha about a feature of her iPhone, which she found, unexpected. And she said that had upended the presumptions she made about people. And then she went on to tell me more about her visit to Tibet.
You think, Tibetan nuns, they're living in a monastery and they are so, backward up to a point. They absolutely weren't. The priests were, or the monks were walking around in New Balance trainers, and there was a Coke machine in Lhasa, and they were just, there were Porsches in the streets, and I had in my head such a kind of confirmed idea of what Lhasa would look like. And as much as I didn't enjoy it, because it's just completely taken over by the Chinese now, and Tibet will never be free, and I could also see that they'd made peace with it. They everyday person walking the streets in Tibet had made peace with the fact that this was something that was never going to change.
Mm.
And I had to just accept and respect that. I didn't like it. And I realized that I'd got my kind of, I guess to a point, white savior complex of how do we come in here and tell you all that you shouldn't be ordering Coke from a machine and driving a gold Porsche and all these other things. But they had just accepted their fate of how it was, and they were trying to live with it as best as they could.
Mm.
And I just came away thinking this moment has taught me that I can't just turn up here and impose what I think is right and what should be done. I don't live here. I have not lived under occupation. I haven't understood what these things are like for more than 2 days. And I think that's what is so interesting for me about travel is not just learning about people or finding out their stories, but it's also very much about challenging my own ideas about things
Yes.
when I get to
Yeah.
places. And often I don't like them. I
Yes.
kind
Same.
of, okay, this is how it is, but it's not my place to judge this. It's
Mhm.
not to decide what's right or wrong. It just is.
Yeah.
Again, it's also not for me to like or question. It's not my country. I don't live here, but I have to also just be very respectful of the way people do things. And another place where I saw that was in North Korea when I met a really wonderful veteran called Bob, who was Boston Bobby, who's from Boston, and he was in his 80s actually, and we're still in touch. 10 years later, Bob had come out to North Korea by himself. He just wanted to travel around and I suppose make peace with this idea of North Korea. And he'd had a friend out there during the war who had actually been working on a ship that the Koreans had captured. And he had promised his friend that he would go out there and take a photograph of it because it was one of the things that they took us to visit. And he just went there to do that for him. And he gave it the middle finger and we took the picture for him. And he said, I'm sure they're going to delete it off my camera at the border, but I said I'd do it for him. And Bob was amazing. He traveled alone. He had his wife Brenda at home, all his grandkids, and he said she just doesn't like travel, so I did it by myself. And he said I've been to Mongolia riding, I've been to Iran, I'm going there next year, I'm going back to Iraq. He was just so inspiring to me, and it was their. I remember it was their 60th wedding anniversary while we were out there.
Oh no.
He took out an envelope of photos of his family and he was like, "Oh, I really miss them, but I'm still gonna come and do this." And I thought, "Oh, God, I want to be 80 and still having that interest in other people and that
Yeah.
real kind of yearning for knowledge and understanding other people and challenging your kind of ill will towards people as well, because it was a big deal for him. Everywhere we went, they referred to Americans as the imperialists, American imperialists and Japanese imperialists. And he said it's quite grating after, 9 days of being talked about in this way.
Gosh.
And but he said, "I need to do it. I need to come here and I need to confront this." And I just found him I think a lot of my travels are not just about the people in the countries where I go, but also the people visiting there.
Yeah.
And that's also a very interesting way to actually understand a place is, who are these people that come to North Korea on holiday? Why are they here? Why are the tourists here? Why are these other travelers choosing this place?
Yeah.
And often I learn a lot about a country through the people that have actually passed through it alongside me as tourists.
Mm.
And so many times they've actually been the most intriguing people that I've come across. It tells you a lot about a person on where they go and how they're choosing to actually visit that place. Because there are so many people that just come through, they don't want to learn the history, they just want to fly and flop and will actively go out of their way to not engage and to do, and you know what? Each to their own. Again, I'm not here to judge people on how they move around, but it is insightful.
Such a lot to think about here. I think the reflection on Tibetans accepting the changes and it not being our place to rush in and save them is hard but important. And also Monisha's friend Bob also gives us a lot of insight into holding multiple different perspectives at once. I've always said that travel is so important because it opens us up to learning all about these different perspectives. But I think my downfall in hindsight and on reflection after making this episode is often I learn more about how other people think, but I still judge them. Internally judge them if I consider them quote unquote wrong. So that's something I will continue to contemplate. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to episode 377 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. In the show notes, I'll leave some links if you want to dive deeper into any of these guests and their stories. I started off chatting with Kiliii Yuyan. You can find out more about Kiliii at his website, kiliii.com. That's Kilii. Kilii's got a new book coming out soon called Guardians of Life, Indigenous Knowledge, Indigenous Science and Restoring the Planet. Looks beautiful. It's all his photography, and I'll leave a link to that. I think it's out in February or March, if I recall. Next up, I chatted with the delightful Jamie Burr, and more info about Jamie at jamieburr.com. If you are working in tourism, in fact, make sure you connect with Jamie somewhere, because he's running one of the best the best tourism networking events I have ever been to. So check out Jamie if you're working in the industry. I have been to his virtual event and found it fabulous. And lastly, I chatted with Monisha Rajesh, more about Monisha at monisharajesh.com. Of course, we have a book club episode with Monisha about her newest book. I'll leave a link to that, Moonlight Express, Around the World by Night Train, a fabulous book. If you have some perspectives to share, come along to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travellers. You can also hear more about what I'm up to, what the podcast is up to, and what other travellers are up to by joining the newsletter list at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All of these links and more in the show notes for this episode. You can find them at notaballerina.com/377. So again, Happy New Year, happy 2026 travels, or at the very least, happy thinking and dreaming about travels past and future. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.